Welcome back to Let's Get Weird About with Scott Paladin. This week, we are joined by S.J. Ryker to have a conversation about Hellboy. So, join us, won't you? Product ratio on this particular project is such that I'm just going to let Riverside do it. And So far, it hasn't ever screwed me up except for when I've screwed Ed up. The Discord, it does occasionally like to, I'm going to double check it right now, because it does like to choose my webcam as the audio source on occasion.
Oh yeah, I checked mine and it looked like it was pulling from the.
Yeah. It says it's pulling yours from your Yeti. So
yours sounds good as well. So it doesn't sound like a
distant, far off ghost or anything like that. Yeah.
I mean, not being haunted by the ghosts of podcasts past.
I guess we'll roll into it. The first question is always, if someone was to ask, who is S.J. Ryker, what do you hope the answer is?
Oh, man. If we want to get philosophical, a good dude.
Sure.
If want to be a little bit more concrete than that, hopefully a decent storyteller, good writer, good performer, good dad would be pretty cool to have high on the list too.
Gotcha. Cool.
Yeah.
I love the word storyteller as like the broadest possible version of like artist and like creator. You know, it's one of those words that I think really goes, because like almost anything can be a story. Like even an object can be a story in a lot of ways, which is really cool.
Yeah. To me, like storytelling is. I actually talked to somebody about this recently. You know, one of the things that people like to throw out as like a pithy line is that, you know, you should create art for yourself. You know, if you don't concern yourself with what anybody else thinks of it, you know, that you should create art in a vacuum. And if anybody else likes it, you know, that's a benefit. And it's like, to me, I appreciate that. I understand there are people that like that. And if that's what works for you, more power to you. But to me, like my stories, my art, the things that I love are about this harmony, this resonance with another person in another time, in another space, where we both for a moment feel the same things and think the same things. And like, that's what I love. And so like when people try to say, you know, like create art in a vacuum, I'm like, there's nobody else in the vacuum. That's not why. I hate to get so into it immediately, but you brought it up. Like that kind of advice to me screams like, I don't know. It seems so impossible because all art requires an audience of some sort. And I think I understand maybe what people were thinking of, and like, don't try to make something that you think everyone will like. Pandering, you know, I feel like is one thing. Yeah, that's a reasonable thing. Like, because you're never going to make anything that everyone's going to like. So any decisions that you make, all creative decisions are going to like turn some people off. You're never going to please everybody. The way I've always thought of it is, that like you write to kind of some particular person, like you kind of usually have it in your mind, like who the audience is. And for me, it's always like a particular person. I say like, if I'm writing a story, I'm like, this is for like, you know, my dad, for example, is a really good, I'm like, okay, this story, I wrote this in mind with him in mind. And so I know that I'm going to be playing towards his tastes, and it's a communication that I'm having with a sort of hypothetical version of him that is listening to it. And I know that I'm going to catch other people up in that conversation. But like, if I was trying to talk to everyone all at once or no one in particular, then like, you know, where does that conversation even start? Yeah. And, you know, you bring up a good point, you know, that like really no art is done in a vacuum. Yeah. And I mean, it's kind of a two-way thing, because like you're not
you know, as much as we love the idea of like the author creating, you know, from pure ether, something amazing,
Yeah.
you know, you're not, you're influenced by every other artist that you've seen. I mean, kind of fits into the subject matter here, you know, like one of the reasons why I, you know, one of the biggest influences on me has been Hellboy and stuff like that. And it has shaped not just in terms of genre fiction, but like the way that I view what stories can do, you know?
So I guess if we're gonna go ahead and pull on to Hellboy, I guess I want to start at the beginning. How did you encounter Hellboy originally?
Not to sound too much like a poser, but I originally found out about it because of the movie.
Okay.
You know, that was my first introduction. I had seen the comics in my local comic shop and stuff like that, but I didn't really know anything about them. And I was still kind of in my big two phase at that point, you know, reading mostly Marvel, you know, occasionally some Green Lantern and DC and stuff like that. But then the movie came out and I was like, this looks really interesting. And I had a friend of mine, we both had movies that we kind of latched onto that kind of catered to our tastes. Hellboy looked cool. And I was like, we got to go watch this. And he's like, yeah, I think that the Van Helsing movie is going to be amazing. And we watched both those movies and he's like, yeah, your movie was better.
Oh man, you could, I mean, there could be a wider delta between the quality of those two movies, but man, that is a really hard stretch. Those are pretty far different. I mean, especially to be sort of in kind of the same genre-ish area, of a sort of action-based Van Helsing, I don't think itself was comic book based, but has a very comic book feel to it.
Yeah, and I mean the fact that they like incorporate all the Universal monsters in it, basically. On paper, they have like they're a big, let's put a bunch of monsters together in a picture and see how it goes. And it's like, but one of them ended up being like really cool and the other one was Van Helsing.
Well, okay, so in case our members of our audience are unfamiliar with Hellboy as a property, can you give us like the broadest possible strokes of explaining Hellboy?
Yeah, so the elevator pitch for Hellboy, in my mind, must have gone like, imagine the most average everyman that you can, a guy that, you know, works a 9-to-5 job, you know, the kind of guy that like stops to like pet a dog or a cat or something like that, the kind of guy that like you want to go and have a beer with.
Okay.
Now imagine he's over 6 foot tall, fiery red skin, has 2 horns that he's shaved down to stumps on his head, and has a giant rock right red hand. And he hunts monsters and ghosts for a living.
Okay.
It's Oh, sorry.
No, I was just saying it was interesting that you start with it. It's like you so emphasize the like 9-to-5-ness of it, the sort of ordinariness of it. That's not something I remember from the movies very well. Is that something that maybe from the comic books, or is that just kind of his personality? Or
it's kind of his personality.
Gotcha.
Okay. Hellboy is very much a normal person. Who everyone else is trying to thrust significance and importance and greatness and meaning and horror onto. Right. Everybody wants to make him something other than just Hellboy.
Gotcha.
And he's just a guy that just wants to live his life.
Gotcha.
He has friends, he has family, and everybody else either wants to make him, you know, the cosmic being that will destroy the world, Anungun Rama, and then other people are like, you know, afraid of him because he's a big devil man.
Right. That reminds me so much of characters like Data from Star Trek, where it's like a reaching for the mundanity of humanity, you know, like trying to find a sort of like, it's to find a humanity in like more ordinary parts of it. and just reaching for that sort of everyman approach and in a way finding the beauty and value in those parts of being a person. As opposed to being like all about ambition and the heights of character. Go ahead.
And I mean, like Hellboy, you know, there's a bunch of like memes that kind of have arisen from like various panels from this. One of the biggest ones is that it shows, you know, basically the young Hellboy, like as a child, being given pancakes for the very first time in his life, and then it cuts instantly to the city of Pandemonium behind the gates of hell. The legions of the damned are screaming in grief, and like, you know, the demons of hell are like, what has happened? He has eaten the pancake. He is lost to us now. And it's just like the notion that just the fabled destined destroyer of Earth is swayed because he's like, I like pancakes. And obviously there's like, you know, levels of canonicity to that.
Sure.
But like whether or not like that particular moment is, you know, what saved humanity from destruction, it reflects the core of the character and like his whole thing. And I love it so much.
There's something, even if it's not like the reason, it feels emblematic of the reasons why he doesn't go on that path, you know? It's all those. Yeah. I gotcha. So you entered into the Hellboy fandom or found Hellboy via the movies, but it sounds like maybe then we went on and read the comics and stuff. So which is the sort of more the one that you find closer to your heart these days?
Oh, definitely the comics. The comics are the movies. The first two movies, the Guillermo del Toro ones, are amazing. I love them. But you know, I picked up the comics just to kind of, you know, like compare, and I instantly fell in love. I just, at that point, they had up to like 6 trade paperbacks out. And, you know, I bought one of them, and then the very next day I had already read through the first one, and I bought the other 5, and I just read them instantly. And it was, oh man, it was one of the best experiences that I had. And it was, you know, just this introduction to characters and to this setting that, you know, I say it all the time, you know, but like it literally shaped how I view storytelling. The ability to weave together so many different kind of pantheons in both like the literal and figurative sense.
Sure.
Because like Hellboy obviously has, you know, like devils in it, you know, it's got the notions of like hell and allusions to heaven. It doesn't really go. Heaven's always the one that it shows less of because it doesn't want to. But
heaven is a particular storytelling problem that you have to solve in a lot of ways for sure. So it's understandable that's not where all the interesting stories take place.
But it's you know, it's got that, but then you get, you know, the cosmic horror angle of it, you know, the very like Lovecraftian big spooky tentacle monsters, and then you get like Stoker-esque vampires in there, and then you get like gods and goddesses from various pantheons, Japanese yokai. Mike Mignola did such a great job of like folding together various things in ways that like it feels like everything is possible.
I love settings where the sort of all myths are true version of reality, where like you have both Greek gods and fairies and, you know, Christianity and Lovecraftian horrors. Like I've seen it done well several times. The one that's coming to mind off the top of my head is Gargoyles. I still fucking love Gargoyles.
Yes.
Gargoyles is so good. And I wonder if I wonder if there's some cross pollination. I feel like there's some amount of influence on one from one to the other. I'm not sure which one would have been the progenitor there, but they definitely feel of a type, Gargoyles and Hellboy, from what little I know of it. But yeah, all myths are true. Like that gives you such a wide playing field to tell stories in, and it's always lovely when somebody can pull it off like that.
Yeah. And it's great because, like, what started off as kind of like a story about Hellboy really branches off into like different eras of like story that you can kind of get into. So like you can focus on Hellboy, but then there's like people that did stuff like all the way back in the Victorian era that influenced the story, and you can learn about them, and you can learn about not to get into too much spoilers, but there's a point where Hellboy kind of goes off and does his own thing, and all his other friends and stuff like that are forced to kind of keep going without him, and you get to read all about their story and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's always like seeing a property like that when you name it after the main character, but like it really does grow beyond them to like be a more of a cast piece, something where you can branch out is it's always interesting where they're like, yeah, this is Hellboy, but we're actually following the other character. I forget the name of the organization that's sort of the central piece.
The BPRD, the Bureau for Paranormal Research and Defense.
Yeah. And man, like the influences I know that I've seen of that property on elsewhere, like you wouldn't have SCP without Hellboy. Like just the whole, like obviously they've toned down certain elements of it and toned other things up, but like that somebody was reading Hellboy when they thought of that idea, it definitely feels like, even if it's not the most popular comic in the world, it feels like one of those comics that all of your favorite authors all liked. Yeah, for sure. And I gotta say, like, you haven't mentioned it yet, but Mike Mignola's art, holy fucking shit. Oh my God. Like his style is so distinct and so impressively good. I have to do an image search just because I need to.
It uses such very strong areas of color. Yeah. It's almost as though it's like cut out from construction paper and put on the page, in that it has like so little blending of shadow.
Yeah. It's all about like these really stark contrasts in blocks of color. And especially black. His use of black is just like huge swaths of just 100% black, like not using it as a shading, but just like letting things disappear into it. And then, where he has simplicity in his color choice, there's very little gradients. There's usually, at least what I'm seeing here, there's very few colors overall, but making up for it with like intricate details elsewhere and adding texture in with the use of these colors. Just like, it's one of those things, like the moment that once you clock his art style, you
recognize it instantly.
Yeah. He's one of those, he's just so incredibly distinctive. I can't think of anybody else like him, it's so good.
Yeah. And, you talking about like how he has like such prevalent use of like black and stuff like that. And then there are these certain panels. The one that comes to my mind is the cover of issue number 1 of Hellboy the Island, where it's just a field of white with Hellboy standing on like what looks maybe like an outcropping of rock, and just like him kind of like silhouetted almost, like you can see just a little bit of color, but then on a field of white. And then the next issue is like pitch black on the front with like a heart. And there's like these just two very contradictory color schemes and images for, like, in my opinion, what kind of marks like the midway point or the turning point for like Hellboy's journey. It's like, this is what happened before, this is what happens after. And it's just, man, it's Man, I got so sad when Mike Mignola stopped doing the art for I mean, he couldn't keep up with the production of it, and he enjoyed the writing more, and I was a little bummed about it, but then I kind of got to where I'm blanking on his name right now. The artist that took over for BPRD, I want to say that it was Guy Davis. Let me.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, Guy Davis, who has, in my opinion, a much rougher style, but that really grew on me as time went on. And so as much as I was sad to have him step away from some of these other titles and other things, it was cool how he managed to find people that could still carry on the spirit and tone of everything.
Yeah, I'm looking at his art. It's one of those things you can definitely see, or at least his work on BPRD, where he's carrying over some of that Mike Mignola, sort of the forms are there, but his style is much more sketchy and not so stark.
You can see there's actual shadow blending in over a character's face as opposed to.
And it's definitely one of those things where you miss the days when it was the original artist. Whenever there's a change like that, you're always like, oh man, I like when the thing that you love changes. But there's definitely virtue in finding people that can carry on, and then watching those people not just try to imitate the original creator and just try to disappear into somebody else's work, but actually put their own mark on it, and allowing that sort of that change to tell new kinds of stories, to present a new way to put their own mark on it. Because I'm sure there's people out there who look at this and go, no, Mike Mignola is great, but the one I first read was Guy Davis's stuff, and so that's what I think of. And it's great that there's the that multiple people can find their favorite version of it if there's enough variety and expansion there. For something, obviously for a singular story, having a singular vision works, but for something that's been running for years and issues and issues, I think there's definitely room for various artists to put their mark on it, and that's great.
That's one of the things that I really enjoy about Hellboy is just how broad it is in subject matter, tone, even art styles as time goes on and stuff like that. And but like you said, I have the things that will always resonate the best for me, and having Mike Mignola come back for Hellboy's kind of final solo issues and stuff like that was just such a beautiful kind of capstone for the character that
return to form. Yeah. I'm going to assume most of our audience is more familiar with the Guillermo del Toro films, especially that first one. Do you feel like there's a place where those fall short of what you love about the comics, or are they mostly good, but just different? Or
they do a good job of kind of catching the emotional core of the Hellboy story, but they do kind of deviate. The first one mixes together a lot of elements from the early stuff. You've got elements from Seed of Destruction, which is the first Hellboy trade. A couple of the side stories, like the Chained Coffin, which or the corpse is the one where he has to carry the dead body to try and find him a home. But at the end of the day, Ron Perlman just did such a good job of capturing that beleaguered, man, I'm tired.
Yeah.
I just want to go home, drink a beer, and watch the game. What are you doing?
I get you.
But if I had to kind of pick, And it's interesting. In preparation for this, I reread Seed of Destruction, and one thing that I noticed is there is a lot of, the best way I could describe it is, you know how like in Blade Runner they had the cut that had like the narration tracks.
Yeah. That's the theatrical.
That like, yeah, the theatrical cut that like nobody likes. Or I mean,
not nobody.
Yeah.
We could have a whole tangent about Blade Runner and the different versions of Blade Runner that exist and which ones are worth watching and which ones are. But I think it's interesting because everybody hated the narrator cut. And then I've heard the way things happen. If everybody hates something, eventually somebody's going to write a think piece about, well, actually that's underrated. And then it leads to people reevaluating it. And now
that's true.
Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like, it was so hated for so long. And then recently I've started to hear more people being like, oh yeah, by the way, no, it's actually not that bad. And it's like, people can't help but be contrary. Like it's one of those things like sometimes you can almost not find, you almost can't believe people's opinions because they just feel the need to be contrarian about stuff sometimes. But that doesn't mean that they're wrong. It's just hard to tell the difference between which one's going or not. But I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You're back.
Oh, no, that's fine. There's a very similar amount of like, thought boxes of Hellboy kind of narrating everything. And it's great because it kind of matches the, showing his, again, down to earth nature and stuff like that. But it's not something that's really carried throughout the series. The series, as time goes on, very much kind of lets panels be quieter and lets Hellboy kind of talk through words and action rather than like, telepathy into his state. And it struck me because they introduced a character in the movie, the surrogate for the audience, who's kind of the new BPRD agent.
Oh, okay. The sort of everyman guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Myers, I think. Agent Myers. And, he's a original for the movie character.
Yeah.
But I feel like they very much serve the same kind of role where it's, this is so the audience doesn't get lost. This is so, we can keep up with everything that's going on.
Gotcha.
But neither of them were carried over as time went on. They got rid of Myers in the second movie, made a joke about him getting stationed in like Antarctica or something like that.
It's like concessions to adaptation, right? Where it's like we can't, in this I'm glad they went with a character instead of trying to do a narration. That would have been a very strange decision to try to carry the sort of comic book panel narration into like over voiceover narration on a movie. I think that might have been maybe not a great decision. So I'm glad they went that way, but it's also one of those things where you do need something to explain stuff to the audience. But like, once you've done that and you've got them bought in, you can just be like, screw you. We don't really need this stuff anymore if it's not adding anything. I guess that maybe is a sign that they should have tried harder to make Myers work as a character that would have been fitting into the world, or find some of the. I guess it's just one of those things where like it would have been better if they'd done more with him than like make him the guy who can ask all the questions the audience is going to be asking.
Yeah, I mean, truth be told, there's stuff that the movie does different, but I don't necessarily think that it's ever worse than the comic. And in some ways I feel like they might work better in like very short, like overall I think the comic story is still better, but I mean it has a lot more room to breathe and play and backfill stuff. But like Hellboy's relationship with his, surrogate father, Professor Broom, is explored so much more in the movie.
Oh, okay.
Than in the trade paperback for the first one. Now they go in later on, and you have, issues that are taking place before Hellboy's first debut.
Gotcha.
That like do show their relationship and show that warmth and stuff like that. But like, the movie does a very good job of kind of showing that from the start.
Yeah. Okay.
As opposed to like having to kind of backfill in and be like, this is why this was sad.
Yeah.
losing this character because, you know, this is a human that stood up for a demon and said, he's just a boy, you know, don't hurt him.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's interesting where sometimes an adaptation, you know, they have different goals and different limitations, right? Like you just, for example, in a movie, you have 90 minutes and that means you get X number of words and you just can't, you're not going to be able to keep your audience around that much longer. So you have to, that changes your creative outputs. And, but then sometimes it's also just a second draft, right? Like it's somebody else taking a look at something and going, I know maybe this is a failure. I'm going to try something slightly different. And so sometimes that's an improvement. Sometimes it's not, but like, you know, and oftentimes the goals are slightly different. You know, if you only have 90 minutes to tell a story and you're telling it with moving pictures as opposed to still images and text on a page, you know, like just what you're trying to do can be fundamentally different. And like, it's one of those things where I love when people can be appreciative of both versions of something, you know, that like you can look at it and go, oh yeah, they're accomplishing different things. You don't necessarily need to compare them against each other, you know, like the book was better crowd. It's like, yeah, dude, like the book and the movie are gonna be different. Like there's like not a way, like you can maybe say I like books better than I like movies, but saying that the book was better than the movie, it can be a kind of a fraught thing when they're just different. The nature of the beast is different, you know, they're trying to accomplish different stuff.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And I mean, if you twist my arm, had to make me say like one thing that I feel like that the movies fell flat on. Mm-hmm. Second movie, I would say the depiction of Johann Kraus, the spirit medium who's made of ectoplasm.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And is like inside the suit animating it. Like one, I feel like having what was his name? Seth MacFarlane do the voice for it. Just not a big fan of his.
Oh yeah. Yeah, okay. It's been a while since I've seen the second movie, and I forgot that was him. That is a weird pull.
It just, again, you know, they're not beholden to the source material, but sure. Johann's story is not exactly comedic. Mm-hmm. You know, just quick synopsis. Basically, sure. He's like a real spirit medium that like would, you know, help people like communicate with their loved ones who happen to be projecting into the astral plane when a horrible like planet-wide psychic event happened because somebody broke some relic or something in China that killed like a bunch of people, left a bunch of people as basically soulless zombies, and then his body was completely disintegrated, but his soul remains in ectoplasm.
Yeah.
And so the BPRD found him, put him in a containment unit so he didn't disperse, and now he's just living ectoplasm, basically.
Yeah, that definitely, my initial read of a character like that would not be super comedic either. Now, you mentioned him, and I'd completely forgot he was in that movie. So that definitely says something about his effect on the overall, or his place in the overall story that I just could not remember that character existed. So obviously, yeah, I think I might be tentatively agree with you that like, yeah, they probably didn't handle that one super well. If he was forgettable enough that I don't remember him.
Yeah. And you know, then the characterization for him again was very different. You know, in this one, he's very much like the cliche of like the efficient German who does not have time for the funny business.
Yeah.
And but in doing so is making a bunch of jokes or like setting up a bunch of jokes because everybody is defying him, you know.
Gotcha.
And yeah, like it's just very different because in the comics he's a very soft-spoken, kind, understanding man, like a proper gentleman who ironically enough never meets Hellboy until basically the end of the story, because by that point Hellboy has kind of pieced out from the BPRD.
Gotcha. It's always funny when characters like you think of them or media presents them as being like sort of like always at each other's throats, and then like you go back to the source material and you're like, oh, these guys didn't even they weren't even in a room together. My favorite version of that is the movie The Fifth Element. Fantastic movie. Bruce Willis is the protagonist, and Gary Oldman plays the antagonist.
John Baptiste Emmanuel Zorg.
Yeah. And those characters do not ever are never in the same place at the same time. They don't come face to face. They're not even in the same location. Like they're on the same planet at one point on Earth, but that's about it. They're not even they're never in the same room. They're not they just don't meet through the entire movie.
Yeah, and that's so funny because like continues to be an antagonist, but through proxy, very much.
Like, yeah, he's the one like pulling the strings or whatever, and like setting things in motion. But like, yeah, they don't like have a you don't have a shootout or anything like that.
Yeah.
Which is probably maybe a lesson to take away from it, where it's like, yeah, if you're because you have to admit, like, if you put Zorg and Corbin Dallas in a room together,
Zorg's getting his ass beat.
Yeah, that doesn't last very long. You'd have to put some sort of conceit in there, which is probably why so many movies end up with like their main character, or not movies, video games is the one that do it, where it's like, oh yeah, well, we need you to fight the main guy who's not physically imposing anyway. Guess what? He's going to have a giant mech suit. We're just going to fall back on that. Thank God they didn't do it this
time. Yeah, that's always frustrating, is like when the character serves as like a more existential, a more like symbolic threat or
soft power threat,
pairing.
Or they've got their abilities are outside of they're not like, well, I mean, like a well-crafted villain often is that way, where they're not just the same power set and skill set as your main character and who's better at it, because that's kind of inherently a boring conflict.
Yeah, don't tell Marvel.
I fucking wish somebody would tell Marvel. It's you can always tell who gets it and who does it, especially in DC universes, because it's like, do they put Lex Luthor in a big ass suit and like do they give him powers? Because like Lex Luthor, the whole point of that character is that he's just a dude who's really smart, and he like has a bunch of resources. Like he's never going to punch Superman. That's the whole point. And like understanding how you have those sort of asymmetrical conflicts, and that's where your story comes out that way, is really important to making a thing that actually works. Otherwise you will, it'll be fucking stupid as shit.
Yeah. The way a good Lex Luthor wins is not by punching Superman to death, but by creating a media smear campaign where something Superman does is recontextualized, and everyone in Metropolis now hates Superman.
Exactly. And
thinks Lex Luthor is the best.
Or orchestrates a scenario where, in order for Superman to do the right thing, he has to do something that accomplishes a goal that Lex Luthor wants to happen. He has to go fight.
Ask Luthor for help.
Or ask Luthor for help or something like that, or do something, or like publicly work with Luthor, which gives him like, or let him out of prison.
Credibility.
Like, credibility, or like it's always a manipulation tactic or a Xanatos gambit or something like that, where like, he never, if you've got him in if you give Lex Luthor superpowers, you've already lost the game. Like you've already screwed things up.
And that's kind of a, to bring it back to Hellboy, that's kind of an interesting thing, because there's not, I mean, there are, I guess you could ultimately say there is a big bad villain in Hellboy.
Okay.
And it's the Ogdru Jihad, the Seven Serpents Who Are One, basically big giant cosmic horror imprisoned outside of time and space, and Hellboy is the only one that can free him.
Sure. Yeah,
and the entire premise is just every person just apparently wants Hellboy to open this thing and bust this dude out. Like you've got Grigory Rasputin, you've got the Nazis, you've got crazed doctors that make cybernetic gorilla monsters. You've got all sorts of stuff just constantly trying to either one, make Hellboy do it, or two, steal Hellboy's power that allows him to do this. And it's just like, man, like, but you know, it's all the Ogdru Jihad, but the Ogdru Jihad is just kind of like doesn't do anything for like basically the entire series.
Sure, yeah.
Until like the final chapters and stuff like that, where it actually kind of becomes like a more looming existential presence.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's sort of the Cthulhu problem where like, okay, yeah, you know, the big enemy or the big boss of the original Call of Cthulhu, but like kind of doesn't do a whole lot. Like it's villain as MacGuffin in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So it sounds like they spent a lot of time in that territory before finally coming around and being like, okay, we need to make this an actual character and not just an extension of Hellboy's, you know, cool stone arm, you know, in terms of story wise, like, okay, here's why it exists and what it can do.
Yeah. And I mean, it's kind of one of those, like villain by presence sort of situations.
Yeah.
And I mean, as time goes on, you know, the early first half Hellboy, you know, all this stuff is very mysterious. You're kind of drip fed like hints as to like, how did Hellboy get involved with this?
Yeah.
What does the right hand of doom even do?
Yeah.
You know, why did we see weird aliens in the first volume of Hellboy when they were looking at the Ogdru Jihad in weird parallel dimension space-time or whatever?
Gotcha.
None of these things are answered for like a combination of like basically a decade.
Gotcha.
And 6 volumes of Hellboy.
Right.
And then they just like come out with the steel chair
okay,
and just hit you with knowledge in like 2 issues.
Okay. Did they pull that off? Is that because that normally what you're describing to me sounds like some other properties that I've heard that it's like, oh, they were like, oh shit, we need to wrap this shit up all of a sudden.
to me,
yeah,
it was amazing.
Okay.
Like I remember reading The Island. I was in college, and there had been kind of a downtime in like Hellboy where there wasn't any new stuff. And I picked up these 2, and like it recontextualized things that have happened in the past. It didn't answer everything.
Yeah.
But it answered a lot of questions, and it left new ones that were just so cool. And it made this like really comprehensive, like, man, I want to like say stuff, but I don't want to spoil stuff.
Okay, so well, here's the thing: we're 43 minutes into the recording. I don't know how long it's going to be in the actual episode. Sometimes somewhat less than that. What I will say is that audience, if you want to remain unspoiled about Hellboy, you've had 43 minutes of good content from us. And if you want to remain unspoiled, go, you know, like it's available, go get it. And maybe you can come back here and join us when you're done, or not. Or if you're somebody else who just doesn't mind spoilers, or in fact enjoys spoilers, then like here from on out, we're gonna take off the handcuffs from SJ and talk spoilers.
This is dangerous. Okay? This is dangerous. I'm just gonna. All right. So, you know, basically at this point, Hellboy has left the BPRD because they were doing things that he considered unscrupulous. Put a bomb in one of his fellow agents because they were like, can we trust him? He found out, and he's like, are you going to put a bomb in me next?
Yeah.
And he basically goes on a soul-searching mission that gets him lost under the sea, imprisoned by a mermaid witch, eventually freed, and he ends up on an island where he runs into basically a Spanish like Inquisition monk.
Okay.
Who went to the New World, found a bunch of like ancient recordings of like prehistory and stuff like that. And then was like, oh, I've been awakened to the hidden mysteries of the earth and know everything now. And then the Inquisition was like, that sounds like heresy to me. And then they murdered him. Then he's just been kind of waiting, found Hellboy, and is trying to replace him.
Okay.
To basically take his blood and put his like inside Hellboy and become Anungan Rama, which is, you know, like his true name, the destroyer of worlds and stuff like that. And
gotcha.
you find out through all of this that like basically there were, you know, angels or like beings that served whatever created the universe and stuff like that, and they made everything, and then one of them made a form that it left out in the void of the cold and the dark and the night, and into that came the essence of the Agdru Jihad, the seven who are one, the one that's going to destroy everything. And it tried to. And it took all the hosts of, you know, essentially heaven to stop this thing. But they didn't stop it. They didn't kill it. They could only imprison it. The one who made it could imprison him. And then the rest of the Watchers, the angels, turned on him, tore him to pieces, and only one piece remained. The right hand.
Gotcha.
Which falls into human civilization, is put on a statue that like marks the prehistoric, you know, time frame, you know, the golden age where, you know, people commune with magic and all this other stuff. Very like pre-Atlantis, Kull the Conqueror sort of stuff. And then they get seduced by an evil dark goddess who convinces them to all be horrible degenerates, cultists. And then the statue comes to life and destroys all of them until the right hand is stained red with their blood.
Okay.
And like all of this just creates this like kind of prehistory like mythos that ties into characters that we've met and stuff. And it was just like, man, like, I don't know if he knew that this was where this was going when he started this, but like it fits with all these little breadcrumbs that he put so well that like, I don't know and I don't care.
Yeah. That's, I mean, it's a sign of sticking the landing on that kind of breadcrumbs where you're like, when you get to it, you both are like recontextualized. You're like, okay, I now, things that I thought I knew before, I now understand better. And also like you look at it and you're like, I don't see how it could have been any other way, you know? Yeah, that's a really good sign. It's one of those things where a bunch of creators have learned the wrong lesson from like other, you know, from fandoms and stuff like that, where they look at people and they go, oh man, somebody guessed what we're going to do. We need to change it. And that is completely wrong. It means that you've set things up properly, that people are like starting to look at it and saying, you know, they're picking up what you're putting down, you know? And so it doesn't necessarily need, I mean, obviously if it's like obvious what you're doing and everybody understands it, then maybe that's a time for a subversion. Maybe that's if that's what your goal is. But like if somebody guesses it, that's not the indication that you've totally screwed up, you know? Like it's but like the ability for you to like put out a reveal or a backstory or a prequel, or, you know, finally get to the bottom of things and everything go, oh my God, it all makes sense now. Or, oh my God, all of this, you know, it wasn't what I thought it was going to be, but it all works, you know, that's like I said, it's the sign that you stuck the landing.
Yeah. And it does such a good job of like setting up like things that get paid off later on. Like there's you see like prehistory humans basically, you know, in these tribes like channeling some sort of magic that you find out later on is like cosmic energy or vril or whatever they want to call it, and like the instruments that they use get put into a thing that gets used in World War II to fight the Nazis and stuff like that, which I haven't even mentioned how much I love the fact that this integrates like cool pulp stuff in it as well, just like real like dime store like you know costumed adventurer punching Nazis and like branding mafiosos and stuff like that.
Awesome. Just like being unafraid to sort of lean into the genre pulp, you know, aspects of things, like, and sort of celebrate that. I always love when media does that. This may sound slightly off topic, but have you ever come across a webcomic called Kill 6 Billion Demons?
I have heard of it.
Okay.
It definitely is one that like is on my radar.
Yeah.
I just for some reason have not got around to it.
I will. Webcomics are always a weird thing to recommend to people because it's a little bit like, hey, here's 10 years of archives for you to delve through. It's kind of it can be a Herculean effort. Webcomics are not a they're not a format that values brevity. And then also almost inevitably you are telling somebody about something that's not done and may never be done, like where it's one of those things where like, yeah, the guy's still working on it after all these years, but they haven't finished it. So you don't really know if it's good or not until it's finished. But a lot of the things that you're describing, it's definitely more outlandish and out there and not quite as grounded in the same way that Hellboy is. But some of the things that you're describing about Hellboy keep reminding me of Kill 6 Billion Demons, and which also has, although it's not the same kind of art, it also has amazing art. And is a very interesting multiverse hopping into the world, the cycle of violence that will destroy us all. We keep getting everything keeps turning to set. God came in and split himself into two pieces and then created like there's some stuff in there that I think resonates with what you're talking about with Hellboy that I think you might enjoy, or that our audience might enjoy if they're similarly vibing with what you're talking.
Yeah, I am looking at the art right now, and it is definitely really good.
Yeah,
I am excited about
if anybody who's listening knows the tabletop RPG Lancer, it's the same artist that does all the art for Lancer.
I thought it looked familiar.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. That's one that I will recommend to people. It's good. Again, it's not done, so who knows? Maybe it goes off the rails, or maybe the guy dies and never finishes it, or just gets has to get a day job or something like that. You know how that goes. But I've thoroughly enjoyed what I picked up of it so far. You're also making me really want to actually read Hellboy. I haven't read comics in like a decade or more, but this would be like right at the top of my list for something if I was going to pick it up. If it makes me want to pick it up specifically. Is it so? On that note, though, is it sort of done? Is it like is the Hellboy and BCP the
BPRD?
Yeah, BPRD.
It is, so that's a little complicated because they continue to backfill things. So
Gotcha.
They continue to kind of tell like untold stories of Hellboy, as well as kind of showing like they just had like one that was like giant robot Hellboy, that came out recently, which was super fun. But the main kind of like thrust of the story, as far as like it's I haven't had as much time to keep up on comics, but as far as I'm aware, as of right now, Hellboy's story is kind of done.
That's such a nice thing to hear about a comic series. Like that they not that they're like finished, obviously they're still putting out content, but that they set down to tell a story and told the story, like there is like an arc with a conclusion, even if it's not the ultimate conclusion of everything that's ever going to happen to that character, but like that they told a story is really can be kind of impressive, especially with something that's sort of contained. I like that. I'm always on the lookout for comic properties that don't suffer the expansive universe problem that the big two do, where like they want you so bad to buy and read all of their comic book lines, and they really want to reward all the people who know all of the trivia all the way back to the 70s and 60s and before, that like it can feel super daunting when you're trying to like pick up Spider-Man, for example, and like, do I have to read Spider-Man from issue 1? Do I have to read all of the crossover events? Do I have to read whereas something like Hellboy is, much more digestible. You're like, oh, okay, I realistically could read all of the Hellboy stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, you could read, I'm trying to think if you really need more than that. You could read just the Hellboy comics, and that would be probably enough to get like the whole story and stuff like that. I would say that if you read Hellboy and BPRD, probably flesh it out a little bit more, give you some more understanding for kind of like the parallel stories that are going on there.
Yeah.
I'm a big sucker. I love all the weird little spinoffs that they had. I love Lobster Johnson. He's
I don't know what that is, but the name is fantastic.
Lobster Johnson is the pulp action hero of the Hellboy universe.
Okay, so like when you say he's a hero of that universe, do you mean like he's a fictional character in that universe?
He is both a fictional character and a real person and a ghost.
Like it, love it. I love that the answer is yes, all of those things. That's great. Yeah. As an aside, you like the names in Hellboy, just like the character names, fucking whip ass. Like Abe Sapien and like Lobster Johnson. It's like, and for that matter, just Hellboy. Hellboy is like it is an incredibly simple concept that like the moment I hear it, I'm like, yeah, okay, what the fuck's going on there? Let me get in on that.
And that's not even including Roger the Homunculus. So,
yeah, that's awesome.
But it's, Hellboy is one of those that I always felt like you do not need to read every ancillary story, but you will be rewarded if you do. Yeah. I haven't even read all of it. Like there's some of the vampires stories I didn't read, but like some of the off the beaten path ones, in my opinion, are some of the ones that I enjoyed the most. There was I mentioned, they like made a weapon in World War II, a power suit that's powered by like occult energy and stuff like that. That one turned out to be a really interesting exploration on like the value of human life.
Okay.
The gist of it is that like, this dude dies in the armor and his soul kind of gets infused into it. And then the next guy that puts it on is kind of like talking to him. And the other dude is like attuned to the cosmos at this point. And he's like, what you're doing doesn't matter.
Oh, yeah.
In the grand scheme of things, saving one person's life isn't what matters.
Right.
And like, but this dude is trying desperately to hold on to the human perspective while faced with something cosmic.
Yeah.
And like, to me, that was this incredible story that I hadn't honestly seen a whole lot of, like, when like, I mean, maybe it's just the fiction that I read, but a lot of it really kind of stems towards that nihilistic, you are unimportant in the cosmic scheme of things, and that's the lesson you need to take away, as opposed to the human side holding on for as long as it can against the void, to be like, I don't care what you said, I say it matters. And as long as I say that, it does.
Yeah. Sort of the sort of eternal fight against the entropy of all things to maintain your humanity and the importance thereof.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I think we can wrap up on Hellboy here. If the audience wants to find more of you and your lovely work on the internet, where should they head?
We have a cosmic horror noir podcast, Lake Sky Private Eye. It's currently on a little bit of a hiatus right now. I'm hoping that I can get back to that in the not too distant future, but I am also writing and performing for Breathing Space season 4.
Yes.
One of the stories that I wrote, This Thing of Ours, is going to be in the season, and I'll be taking over the role of Sheriff Grant for one of the other roles. So I'm super excited.
Yeah. And this should be this particular episode of the podcast we're on now. will almost certainly be out ahead of time, so people can look up for that ahead out there. I think this will come out while the season's running, but I think your episodes are a little bit later. I
think in June.
Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah. You got time. It's one of those like time doesn't exist things, because like I'm in all of my stuff's coming out in May, and so like in my head I'm just like, the only month is May. The only thing that matters in this world is May now. Okay. I got to get my shit done by May. Okay, great. Okay. Well, on that note, we will catch the audience at some point in the future, because I don't have any kind of schedule. So I'm just going to release these as I finish them. So goodbye.
Awesome.
Thanks again to SJ for explaining all about the appeal of Hellboy to me. If you want to support the podcast, why don't you recommend us to a friend? Or, I don't know, tweet about how much you like the show. Or, I don't know, leave us a review or rating on one of those sites that does that sort of thing. Or if you want to support us monetarily, you can head over to patreon.com/cursedknowledge. And if you want to find other shows from our network, library.horse is finally a real website. Yep, I finally set it up. So join us next time when we're going to be talking about Crimson Peak with Emma Skinner.